This video was brought to you by Squarespace. Way bigger Hello my dear sweet friends, I'm here with a rather casual review of Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. First off, a brief word on spoilers. It was really hard to talk about Age of Calamity because the very nature of the game itself, when you reach a certain point, becomes kind of a big spoiler, something really unexpected. Even years later, I've been kind of hesitant to talk about it too much. This game isn't really quite the same, but there are elements in there that probably are best experienced yourself fresh, but they're also right there nearly from the beginning of the game, so I don't know. Here's the thing. I don't want to have to tiptoe around all this too much. As far as the first game goes, I'm done. I'm done being careful. You had your chance. You had 5 years. And then for this one, obviously, I'm not going to talk about specific plot points, the individual things that happen, but I am gonna talk about the nature of the story and how it compares to Age of Calamity and the kinds of characters that are in it and all that stuff, so be warned, I guess. So, Age of Imprisonment is a Warriors game, for better or worse. Warriors games are built upon the idea of cutting down just hundreds and thousands of enemies. Combat has you kind of switching between quick and strong attacks, comboing between them, mostly starting with some quick attacks and then hitting a strong attack after a certain number of quick attacks. Generally, I really hate remembering combos in games, but this works pretty well. It's simple enough because it is mostly just weak to strong, but then there's just enough variety between the characters. They all have their own kind of way that they do it, and whether you're gonna hold down the strong attack or press it repeatedly, all the timing is all different. And you've got these smaller enemies that you cut through just loads at a time, and then you've got the bigger enemies that have a health bar. Bigger enemies have a weak point gauge, and when you bring this gauge all the way down, you can do a weak point smash, which, knocks them down and does a ton of damage. Then, as always, you've got a special gauge, which you can build up and then use at any time. Though it feels like special attacks are a lot less important in this game. Mostly they're just used for stunning an enemy for a little bit. There's way more focus on sync attacks, which are new for this game. Each character has their own sync meter, and it's basically like a second special gauge. And when two characters have a full sync meter and they're close enough, you can activate a sync attack where they both attack in tandem. And these are really cool. So they're like special attacks, except you can usually control some part of them. And it's never usually very complicated. It's not usually oh, you gotta make sure that you hit it at the right time. You're pretty much always gonna do a good amount of damage. It mostly just kind of feels good to put a little input in there. Makes it a little bit more exciting. It's also really clever because the game does this thing where sometimes when you knock an enemy down, it'll give you a little pop-up encouraging you to switch to another character. And if you do, it'll add a big chunk to the sync meter. So you're kind of encouraged to keep switching around. It's a really natural way to gently nudge you into using a bunch of different characters instead of just sticking with one the whole time. And mostly it's just the spectacle, which is something that you can say about all of these games. It's so over the top, especially compared to the combat in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. That's very tame by comparison. It's basically an alternate world where for some reason every single person is just 1,000 times more powerful. But all the attacks are super cinematic, they're really cool, and I do think these sync attacks are the best of all, because there's just something so fun about seeing the characters do attacks together. There are plenty of character pairings that don't really have synergy, they kind of just both do their own thing and you do it at the same time, but then a lot of the main characters have unique animations and attacks that they work together to do, and it feels so good. And really, the differences between all of these characters, that's where a lot of the fun is. The broad gameplay strokes are basically identical across all characters, and yet every character does things a little bit differently. Like I said, their quick attack, strong attack combos are different, but they work with a lot of different mechanics that kind of change how you use them. And it's also just down to how they feel to play. What their attacks do, how they move when they attack, how complex some of these mechanics are. And it's really cool because it's it kind of doesn't matter who you are or what your fighting style is, you're probably going to find someone. And you can pick a character based on who you think is cool, but then you'll probably end up finding some characters that just kind of surprise you. You just pick them up and you're just oh, I don't know, just something about this one feels really good. There is a really good amount of character variety and fighting styles, even though, I'm not gonna lie. No, it's still really repetitive. Like, the gameplay is very, very, very repetitive. You will fight the same enemies just a billion, million, trillion times, just over and over and over again. You know, there will be like variations of the enemies, different elements, or different, you know, just overall strength. But for the most part, like, no, you're doing the same thing over and over again. And I think they could really help this by giving the player some more interesting goals. But if anything, with each game, the goals are getting a bit more simple. The original Hyrule Warriors, and I imagine probably a lot of the Warriors games, had a much bigger emphasis on strategy. It's a hack and slash game at its heart, but there are bases all over the map, and you've got to like go through and reclaim the bases and protect the bases when monsters are gonna bring them down. A lot of the time, your victory depends on securing these bases. And then in Age of Calamity, they scaled this way, way back. Like, it was just way less important. It was way more about just fighting. And it's been, you know, 5 years since I played Age of Calamity, but I feel like they've scaled it back even more. It's almost like, why are you even still doing the base thing? It's almost meaningless now. There are like a couple times when it's like, you gotta go in and secure the bases, or like, oh no, protect the base, but like 99.9% of the time, it really does just boil down to, go over here and fight this enemy. Like, that's really just it. Just keep following the map markers and fighting the enemies that are at the map markers. So yeah, it is very repetitive. However, I do advise people not to judge too quickly, because I didn't think I would like any Warriors game ever. Like, it like on paper, it does not sound like my kind of thing, but I did end up liking the original Hyrule Warriors a lot more than I expected. Even then though, I kind of bounced off of that after a while, but then Age of Calamity, it had way more focus on like a real story, and I don't know, long story short, I really got hooked into it. I could tell that it was repetitive, but that's the thing about a game. If you're enjoying the gameplay that much, and then you have a lot of stuff supporting the gameplay, then you don't necessarily mind the repetition that much. And the same is true here. Even if it's repetitive, the gameplay is very, very good. The combat is incredibly fun. It's just, ooh, it's crunchy. You feel super powerful. You're just plowing through all of these enemies and all of these specials and everything. You're fine-tuning your strategies and some of your combos, and you're figuring out how to manage all of these different specials, you know, between like the actual special attacks and the sync strikes and the weak point smashes and everything. Like, when you get it down, and especially if you're like working together with multiple characters and just like unloading on the enemies, it can feel so good. Like, when there's just like a ton of really strong enemies and you just take them all out. You demolish them in moments. It feels awesome. So enemies will use these extra strong attacks, and they've got like a number of different extra strong attacks. And in the original Hyrule Warriors, you would use various Zelda items to, you know, you'd have to use the correct item for the correct attack, and if you do, you stun the enemy. And then in Age of Calamity, they let you do this through the Sheikah Slate, using the runes, you know, the bombs and magnesis and all that stuff. And narratively, it was a little bit strange that every character had access to the Sheikah Slate at any given time instead of like just Link or Zelda. But yeah, mechanically, it made perfect sense. But then now it all makes even more sense, because now characters just have like built-in moves that they can do instead of like just using an item or whatever. They'll just have a move that's good for a monster attacking in this way. But then you can also supplement with Zonai devices. Oh yeah, no, that makes sense. Anybody can pick up a Zonai device and use it. And you can like use a fan to throw a projectile back at them, or use bombs to like cut through their shields. And it's also kind of cool because now if you kind of split between these, then you don't always have to wait for your special action gauge to recharge. You can use some special moves and then go right into using a Zonai device, because that uses battery. That's a different system. It is a little awkward to manage all of these moves. Like, I feel like a little too frequently I had to go into like character menus and figure out what buttons to put all this stuff on. But for the most part, it works. And just the very act of stunning an enemy and like really figuring out how to look for the tells when they're going to do a certain thing and reacting like immediately and just like shutting them down. It's just another thing that feels really good and kind of adds together with all this other stuff, so that when you master it all, you just like, oh, you're just wrecking them. Now, I've always had a problem with the flurry rush ever since Breath of the Wild. I've never been good at it, and I always felt like it was really inconsistent, like when it triggered. And so now, I mean, you know, between all of these games, this is the 4th game to use the Flurry Rush, and it could just be that I've gotten better at it, but I want to say it works better. I want to say it's just easier to do overall. It's something that I can actually kind of rely on now. So yeah, not 100% sure, but I think they're improved. Before we continue, a quick reminder that this video was brought to you by Squarespace. If you need a website but have no idea how to build a website, you know by now that Squarespace makes it super easy, right? No experience needed, you don't need to write a single line of code. With Squarespace's intuitive builder, you can set up everything however you like: text, pictures, embedded videos, anything. You can even start with a template if you want, and in no time, you've got yourself a slick looking site. You can build just about any kind of site too. Something for your business, something personal, a store, a blog, whatever. My site is a blog, and creating content is super easy. I can format my posts however I want, embed links, schedule everything to automatically upload, and even push to social media at a later date, and I'm done. From there, I can check the built-in analytics to see how things are going, and if I ever need more, Squarespace offers lots of powerful extensions. To try out Squarespace for yourself, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. Then when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/Arlo to save 10% off your first website or domain. And now for today's recommendation, this video on Zelda speedruns. YouTube randomly recommended it to me. It's got like 1,000 views at the time of this recording. And it's a really good, quick summary of all the current speedrun records for all the major Zelda games and all the strategies used. It's really fun. Thanks again to Squarespace, and thank you for listening. Please return to the video now. And so, just like with Age of Calamity, it's really cool how much this game emulates the look and the feel of the source material. You know, like the gameplay is very different, and yet you're still running around and swinging a sword. So like, you know, to someone who wasn't really familiar with these games, they'd probably have a hard time telling that this wasn't just Tears of the Kingdom. Enemies even have, like, most of the same attack patterns and the same weaknesses. So, like, going into the game, if you've played a lot of the source material, then, like, you'll already know pretty darn well how to fight most of these enemies. It's your muscle memory will kick in, and it will genuinely help you. It's cool. So yeah, like I said, a reason why the repetitive gameplay isn't necessarily a deal breaker is because of all of the other systems surrounding it, kind of propping it up. Just like in Age of Calamity, you've got a big map of Hyrule, and it's just filled with all of these points of interest, and it's always adding more. You're always gathering materials and money and using it to fill all of these requests and help all of these people. And every single one gives you some sort of little prize. They'll give you more materials, they will unlock various features. Best of all though, they'll just make your characters better. Like you'll just unlock extra hearts or chunks to their special meter, or enhance their strong attacks, just stuff like that. There's a lot of repetition in the combat, but all of the various challenges that you take on, it fuels everything. You know, it feeds this ongoing feedback loop. And something kind of surprising that makes it all that much more fun is like the flavor text for each little quest. Like every single one has a little description of, you know, this character needs this kind of thing so that they can do this. They want to train in this way, so they need some palm fruit or something. You know, there's just like some little thing, and then when you fulfill the request, it gives you another little thing. Oh, they were really happy with the palm fruit. That made them feel great. But this little flavor text adds a surprising amount to the experience. It really just kind of, I don't know, it fills out the lore and like the character building just in little teeny tiny bits here and there. And mostly it just kind of makes you feel like you're really engaging with these characters and engaging with the greater Hyrule and working to reclaim it and rebuild it. It just adds a very human element. It feels a lot more hands-on. And you know, the story in Breath of the Wild was like very bare bones. You didn't really interact a lot with Hyrule itself, and so that's why this in Age of Calamity was so appreciated. And then I'm really happy that they've carried it over to this game too. And then a new thing in this game, at some point in the story, Ganondorf kind of takes over all of Hyrule, and you've got to slowly reclaim each part of the map. It even blocks you from accessing all of the little requests and whatnot until you reclaim a territory. It is a really cool idea. I just kind of wish they had done more with it. I wish there was like, you know, a certain percentage you needed to get to do a certain thing in the story. I just wish it had more of a tangible impact on things, but as it is, it kind of just doesn't really matter. It just blocks your access to stuff. And it's also kind of annoying because way too often you'll have to like do another fight to protect a territory that you've already reclaimed. It's like, you gotta protect this within this many battles or else you'll lose it again. And like, yeah, I don't know. These battles are always like very, very short and easy, but it's just kind of like, oh, come on. Like, I got enough on my plate here. So as for the mechanics and the RPG elements and stuff, there are little changes here and there. I'm not gonna go over every single one. I think for me, the biggest change is they've kind of changed how weapons work. There was way more of a reason to amass a lot more weapons in Age of Calamity, and then you would like fuse them together to pare them down and to pass different abilities onto them. Now, that really doesn't happen. You can choose between different weapons, but mainly you just upgrade them with Zonai, and the Zonai itself will have abilities on it. And so, I don't know, it's a much simpler system. I hate managing weapons. I like upgrading weapons. I think that's fun, but managing a whole bunch and trying to figure out what I should be using, I don't really like that. So this is way, way better in my opinion. And because of the whole fuse mechanic from Tears of the Kingdom, they've found some more ways to use materials in this game. When you upgrade a weapon enough, you even use some material to unlock a weapon art, which is kind of cool. And then there are even attacks where it spends some of your materials, like as though you're putting like teeth and stuff on your sword. And that's kind of cool. I don't use it a lot, but it's I don't know, it's a thing. And then another new thing this game does in its own kind of way, you know, in Age of Calamity, there were these sections where you would pilot the divine beasts and you would use them to just like nuke all of these enemies. And it controlled really awkwardly. It really was not very well executed, but I did still think it was really fun just because it was really just epic and silly. And now you have sections that are very similar, but instead you are flying around. It's like a shoot 'em up, really. It's like Star Fox. These levels are much, much better designed. They're a lot more fun to do. They're more intuitive, and they're just exciting. Like you're zipping around all over the place. So like so much of the fun of these games is just how big and crazy and epic they are. How they take the source material and they blow it up super huge and make it, oh, it's just absolutely nuts. And this, it's perfect. It just it does everything you could want there, and it takes the battle to the skies for a lot of relevant enemies that fly around. It's really cool. Really, I would say the biggest problem with Age of Imprisonment is that it's a sequel. In Age of Calamity, it was really cool fighting in all of these familiar places from Breath of the Wild. You kind of recontextualize them and turn them into different kinds of maps. But this is now the fourth time that we have explored these areas, and you spend a lot of time in places that are just overly familiar by now. There are some new places. You will go down to the depths and you will go up to Sky Islands, and these even have their own separate sections on the map, which is cool. I just think they could have done more here, though. I think there's just a lot more they could have done. They could have had like big sprawling maps of connected Sky Islands or big cave systems. Really doesn't do that. It just kind of like treats them as kind of a new setting to use sometimes. Mainly though, the main problem with this being a sequel, it is just the nature of the game. I loved Age of Calamity. I got really, really hooked into it. I even 100%ed it. I didn't do the DLC, but I did everything else. And after that, I felt like I was full. You know, like I felt satisfied. I felt like I was probably gonna be full for a good long time. I was hoping that 5 years would be enough, but nah, I'm still digesting a little bit. I do like a lot of the stuff this game does. There definitely are some improvements in there, but the overall idea is essentially the same. These days, I have even less patience for repetition in my games, especially if they're gonna downplay the strategy element. I have much less of a desire to collect and upgrade everything, and I love the flavor text, but even that gets old. Like, there's just so many points on the map that reading each thing before and after you do it, even that I found myself starting to just skip them. And another problem is that a sequel is generally supposed to be just bigger and more, but this game is just smaller and less in just about every way. There is much less content overall. Although I really wouldn't say that that's so bad because, you know, most of this is just fluff anyway. So less fluff and, you know, it not being quite so hard to complete the story or to like 100% it if you want to. Yeah, it's not a bad thing. But it is still a little surprising, and you could probably argue that that does impact the value proposition. But then, just looking at the story and the characters, Age of Calamity was crazy. It was absolutely nuts. It was so over the top. It was so epic. It had all these twists and turns, and then of course, the big twist that I'm finally gonna mention now. It was advertised as a prequel to Breath of the Wild, telling the story of what happened 100 years ago, and yet like halfway through the game, time-traveling characters come in and completely upend the timeline. They throw everything off, and it becomes a completely different, alternate timeline story. And this gave it the excuse to bring in so many wacky characters. That was one of the best parts about that game, was just how often it would just drop a new character on you and you'd be like, what? You can play as this person? Like, it's nuts. It's surprise after surprise after surprise. Age of Imprisonment, on the other hand, is so much smaller in scope. It's so much more modest. Not nearly as many surprises when it comes to the characters. The roster is like just as big, which is kind of surprising. It felt really small, but no, it's not smaller at all. It's just kind of full of fluff. For each race, you get multiple alternatives that really don't have any part in the story. They're just kind of around. They just kind of are more fighters that have different move sets that you can choose from if you like, but they're not nearly as interesting or surprising. And then the story, yeah, just so much more modest. Still pretty grand in scope, because it is still talking about a big war all the way across Hyrule. Like, don't get me wrong, it's still really exciting. It's just less crazy, less over the top, less like anime, you know? Fewer twists overall. And unlike Age of Calamity, it delivers what it says on the tin. This really is just the story of however many years ago with Zelda, which she goes back in time, and all of the events that happened there leading into and kind of running parallel to Tears of the Kingdom. It's exactly what it is. And you know what? I actually think this more modest nature, it works. It really does. It's kind of refreshing in its own way. And it's mainly just because I think the story is pretty good. I just think it's a pretty well-told story with decent characters. There are lots of cutscenes. Loads and loads and loads of cutscenes. A lot of story to move through. And just like with Age of Calamity, the cutscenes are animated to look precisely like they came out of the original games. Like, you wouldn't know that this was not a cutscene from Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. Though I do think it's a little bit weird that the gameplay is now 60 FPS and the cutscenes are still like 30 FPS, even though they're pre-rendered, so they could have done 60 FPS. I don't really know. It's a little bit jarring, switching back and forth, but maybe they really wanted to emulate the feel of the original cutscenes, so yeah, I don't know. Overall, it is nice to have them though, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed Rauru as a character. Like, I don't know, he's almost the main character. I was kind of expecting Zelda to be more the main character. She is a main character, but like, you really do spend a lot of time with Rauru, and he really grew on me. Just, he's very, well, he's not a human, but he's not even a Hylian, but he is very human. And that's what's nice about it. He's this king, but he's like just tormented with the responsibility and the need to face this impossibly powerful enemy. And yeah, I don't know, it was good. And even if there isn't quite as much Zelda as I was hoping, I really just want her to have like one really, really strong game where she gets to be herself, but like, I don't know, whatever, it's a whole thing. Not gonna go into it now. But I did like it. It was really nice to see more of what went down back in time and to have so many scenes focused around her. I also really liked the sages. They had essentially zero personality in Tears of the Kingdom, and that was, you know, one of the problems with that story, and one reason why this is a really great opportunity. I particularly like how it kind of feels like each of the sages has a new personality. They didn't just like repeat the champions. They didn't just go with generic personalities that match each of the races. If anything, it looks like they tried to do something kind of purposefully different for each one. You've got a Gerudo chief who is really, really strong and a great leader, but is surprisingly unsure of herself for a Gerudo. You have a little Zora princess who's really bold and even kind of bullheaded. You have a huge beefy Goron who is like 100% chill and calm and collected and modest. And then you've got a Rito with a suave, almost smarmy demeanor, but who is also just incredibly friendly to everyone. And the whole process of seeing what happened back then, it really is fun. It really does fill in the blanks in a lot of natural ways that make it feel a little bit more like they probably planned for this overall versus Age of Calamity, which really did have to make a lot of changes and kind of retcon a lot of stuff. I am mad about one thing, though I'm recognizing that it seems to be a permanent problem with the Zelda series that I need to just get over. It's this thing where they are always referencing an age long past and all of the ancient technology and the forgotten people who have all died, and it's all so mysterious. And then, like, when you get a chance to actually go into the past, they just still reference an even further back past that is even more mysterious. Here we've got the Zonai and the constructs and all. Oh, what happened to the Zonai? I don't know. Oh, we finally get a chance to see that story. But no, even back here, 100,000,000 years into the past, the Zonai have all disappeared. There's only 2 left. Nobody knows where they went. Nobody knows where this technology came from. The depths are filled with a bunch of ruins that are still just as old and abandoned and mysterious as ever. And it's just annoying. I just find it very, very annoying. Beyond that, though, no, I really did enjoy the story. I think it's pretty solid. I will say that Age of Calamity, despite being kind of an alternate story past a certain point, it kind of made up for Breath of the Wild's bad story, or like just really, really bare bones story. It really did help a lot. But this game, I do not feel makes Tears of the Kingdom's story better necessarily. I mean, it is nice to flesh out these characters, so it lifts it up a bit, I suppose, but I have really big problems with that game's story, and this really did not take the opportunity to fix it necessarily. However, it just is a good story by itself. Yeah, so like it doesn't fix Tears of the Kingdom, but it functions as a good story alone. And maybe it's because it's a little bit more modest, because it can be a little bit more patient with its characters and character building and everything. Honestly, I think it might be one of the best stories that we have seen in this era of Zelda across these 4 games. And the absolute best part, even if the story is kind of modest and there aren't a whole lot of weird, crazy, time-traveling twists and turns or whatever, there are 2 characters, and they're right there on the cover, so it's not necessarily a spoiler, but you've got the mysterious construct and Calamo. Oh, my boy Calamo. Like, okay, so one of the characters in this game is a Korok, who's not Hestu, but like an actual little Korok guy, and he is so stinking awesome. He's like my favorite Zelda character now. I cannot believe that I am playing a canonical Zelda game, and I'm this rad little Korok warrior guy who like throws bees at enemies. I love it. I'm in love with him. And I'm just such a big Korok fan overall. You know me. I love my little plant guys, my little magical forest creatures. It's kind of my thing. And we don't get a lot of true Korok characters. This really doesn't happen that much. Like, really, it was Hestu, and then before that, it was Makar. Like, that's all the Korok characters we have. So this is big. This is really big. And look at his hat. He's so cool. And I truly believe that these 2 characters and their relationship, their whole dynamic, and how they fit into the story is the best character/story thing to happen in the entire era, in all of Breath of the Wilddom. In fact, I think it's probably one of the best things in the entire series. Like, I really do mean it. But at the very, very least, in these 4 games, nothing beats the Mysterious Construct and Calamo and their whole thing. This game doesn't have a whole lot of surprises, like, at all. And yet, to me, these characters were, like, kind of the biggest surprise. Finally, let's touch on performance. Age of Calamity, it didn't run great, that's for sure. It was running on Switch 1, and there's just so many enemies on screen, so many effects happening that it could slow down a lot. A whole heck of a lot. But this game shoots for 60 FPS and it reaches it a lot of the time. Like, there's definitely slowdown. Like, it's to be expected. There was gonna be slowdown. Again, sometimes there's just so many enemies. There's so much happening on screen. But overall, the performance is just like, it's head, shoulders, all the way to the knees above Age of Calamity. And it does make it feel a lot better to play. You know, even if overall it's mostly the same game again, the performance alone, all by itself, does make it strictly more enjoyable to engage with. So there's that. Age of Imprisonment is a funny game. In a lot of ways, it's a great sequel to Age of Calamity. It does introduce some new ideas and fixes up some stuff. But then in many ways, it's also not nearly as big or grand. It doesn't have as much content, so it might not feel like it's worth as much money for some people. But it's built upon a pretty solid formula, so like it does have the potential to be just crazy, crazy fun and give dozens of hours of gameplay if it really hooks you. Like if this is your first Warriors game, you might be surprised, like I was when I played the original Hyrule Warriors. Like it really might get you, and if it does, you'll probably have a lot of fun. But if it doesn't hook you, like if that gameplay just doesn't do it for you, then it's probably just a worthless game. Like, it's just an absolute worthless slog. I'm somewhere in the middle. I did enjoy my time with it, but it did start to feel like a little bit too much, and I was still feeling a little bit full from Age of Calamity. I will say that if you're really not sure, or maybe you're even like 100% certain that you won't like the game because you've played a previous Warriors game and you just absolutely hated it, that's fair. And you probably could get away with just watching the cutscenes. You really could. It's a funny thing to say at the end of a review, but like, yeah, you won't be missing out on that much. Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment is a good game that I had a lot of fun with, and that you don't strictly need to play.
You're done.
No holding back!